and welcome to Depth Insights, where we take a depth psychological look at the news, events, and phenomena that are going on in your world today. I'm your host, Bonnie Bright, and I'm also the founder of Depth Psychology Alliance, which is an online academic community for those who are interested in depth psychology and also in the psychology of Carl Jung. And I'm here today with Willi Paul, who is a founder of multiple websites and organizations, as well as a writer and a researcher. He runs three very important websites that you will want to check out. One is communityalchemy.com, where you can see what Willi is all about. One is planetshifter.com, and that will give you a good overview of the work that Willi is doing toward big shifts that are greatly needed in our culture today. And the third one, of course, is openmythsource.com, and that's where Willi talks about the tools that we really need in order to create these shifts, and that's alchemy and mythology, among other things. So, Willi, welcome to Depth Insights. I'm happy to have you here with me.
Thank you. It's been an interesting journey getting to this point via email and Skype and the world at large. I'm happy to be here.
It has, and actually it's interesting because you and I connected because of social media initially. It's funny you mentioned the technology right up front. That's definitely an area that's of interest to me, and is an area of alchemy, which maybe we'll get into in just a bit. But I wonder if you would just take a minute to start us off here and talk a little bit about how you got to where you are today. I mean, alchemy is not something that is really in the mainstream, and it's kind of an unusual practice. So I'd love to hear what your definition of it is and how mythology fits into it, and just a little bit about your path and what's led you to this.
Well, I have been working the interviews with global people for about 2 years with Planet Shifter. My interests initially were in sustainability, innovation, and creative processes. I soon learned that without a sense of a sacred or a spiritual purpose, sustainability was just another buzzword from Silicon Valley. So my perspective has definitely gone from sort of a technological to a more spiritual one. And I'm happy to say that I'm finding a lot of grounding spiritually in the practice of permaculture. I'm not a permaculture farmer. I don't have a garden in the backyard, and I recently gave away my compost machine. But psycho-spiritually, permaculture does open up a wide range of possibilities for the future. And my understanding of alchemy has gone from the digital, perhaps, from some interviews I did in early last year with professors and others. Digital alchemy has then expanded into sound alchemy. I've done some sound studies, some collage recently, and there's other types of alchemy that I'm promoting actively, including shamanistic, which is more traditional, soil alchemy, perhaps community building alchemy. So what I'm hoping to do is take it away from the classicists, the humanitists. I want to make alchemy more of a positive force for understanding how permaculture can work, and even supporting new spiritual belief systems as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, there's so much change going on in the world right now, and all of us, it's impossible to escape, and we're all very aware of it. Part of that is because of the proliferation of media, and we just have more access to know what's going on. But I also feel personally that there is a speeding up, a shift, something that is propelling us to events that are going to be more and more difficult. We've seen a lot of that in globalization and the downturn in the economy that we're, as Americans, experiencing here, but it's also going on around the world. And from my own part, I hear what you're saying about the alchemy and the sustainability, and yet how, the question is, how do we actually apply that to our own lives? How do we go about what kind of soul-centric activities and habits could we focus on in moving toward more of a sustainable culture?
Well, I'd like to propose. Is that working okay? I'm getting feedback.
It sounds great on my end.
Okay, good. Well, I'd like to propose, Bonnie, that everyone has a chunk of backyard that they could do a garden tomorrow. That experience might be a precursor to some of the more spiritual experiences I'm hoping people have surrounding getting the seeds into the ground and eating uh, um, quality food, building their own infrastructure. Um, I think there's a lot of linkages here that need to be made. One of them is the relationship from the permaculture to the localization efforts that we're doing to make a time in the future when there are no trucks delivering food that we'll still be able to eat and have some civil discourse in our cities. It won't be as chaotic as some are projecting. So, as a prototype experience, I'm advocating just having a simple garden and starting there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I actually grew up on a farm, and so I'm very familiar with the concept of growing food, and yet my own lifestyle today has really shifted to a point where it's hard to make the time to do that unless I actually decide I'm going to make the time to do that. And I think the direction that our culture is going, unfortunately, is even though I have that background and have a direct experience of being able to grow my own food from childhood on some level, I'm still not doing it. I'm wondering about the direction that our culture is going, and I think there's increasing awareness that we need this alchemy, we need these soul-centered activities, we need to change our habits in order to make our culture more sustainable. But is it a reality? I mean, are we living in a myth that has gone wrong somehow? Is the myth that we're living in, is the fabric that we're embedded in something that is going to have to be thrown out? Can it be repaired? Does it need to be repaired? What are your thoughts around the context and the fabric of our culture and where we're headed?
Hmm. Well, I'd like to try to answer that by stepping back slightly and talking about Twitter, because I think that's an interesting paradigm, interesting community with both positive and negative attributes. And I'm looking forward to what you think Twitter is and what it isn't. Is it an agora for education? Is it just one big clash of ego? Is it a waste of time? Is Twitter a viable place to teach spiritual presence? Um, as you can probably figure out, I'm having a hard time with Twitter. And even though I try to educate folks there, I don't spend a lot of time there. And I'm sensing that I'm both moving forward with my agenda and falling way behind every day. So what do you think about the positive and negative aspects of Twitter, Bonnie?
Well, I really appreciate that topic. It's something that I actually spend a great deal of time thinking about, and moving toward my own graduate work and dissertation is probably going to play a significant role. I've been thinking a lot lately about the ecology of technology, how technology is actually embedded in the earth, in our bodies, what's the connection there, and that extends to the sacred side of social media. And some people will probably laugh at that and wonder how there could possibly be a sacred side, but I'm absolutely convinced that there is. And Twitter was really, for me, my foray into the social media realm. I hadn't really ventured there before I kind of jumped into Twitter. And my experience has been very unique and interesting, as opposed to what I expected it to be, and that is I feel like Twitter is a stream. It's a stream of consciousness. So in some ways, when you jump on Twitter and you start looking at, all these sound bites of what people are posting and talking about on Twitter, it's almost like just looking at this giant stream where there's ebb and flow and eddies and all kinds of things going on. Um, there's a couple of challenges with that. One is the pace at which it moves. Is there really a way in which we can actually engage at the pace that it's moving and have something meaningful there? And also, it does contribute to that soundbite culture in the sense that everything has to be 140 characters or less. How can there be depth? Is it contributing to a culture in which we're really focused way too much on breadth in some ways and just the shallows and not on the depth of something. However, I'd like to share one experience with you if you'll just humor me for a minute. And that is, I had a moment with Twitter when I was in the stream for a long time, like almost 24 hours without getting out. Now, I was doing other things, but I was kind of just checking in every few minutes. I was contributing a lot. I was following people, following conversations. I actually watched people that I know are on the East Coast go to bed, and then I watched them get up the next morning and start back into the stream. And when I stepped out of that stream, I had such a unique feeling of the sense that I had been in almost a non-ordinary state during that amount of time. And what really occurred to me is that being in that Twitter stream was very much like a shamanic journey in the sense that you step over a threshold, you enter space that is different than ordinary space. There's a landscape which you navigate and you meet and engage with certain people or beings. And then the idea for me at least is to come back out of that Twitter stream with information and insight that I can then pass on to my community, something that will be of help to them, a link somewhere, an article, an interview like this that someone's done, something that's very profound that has touched me in some way. So it's probably a lot about how it's used. That would be my soundbite. What do you think?
So you spent 24 hours in a Twitter consciousness. That's what you said.
Twitter consciousness. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That's interesting. And would you tell me then that Twitter is a sort of psycho-ecology?
Maybe you can say more what you mean by that, but I would say in that sense, it definitely had a framework or a context for me that was both psychological and sacred. And for me, sacred is always connected to ecology, earth-based. Shamanism itself has long been called technology of the sacred. And that's where, going clear back to the early dawn of humanity, they have always had that kind of technology that allows them to connect with nature, to connect with something that's greater than themselves, something divine, perhaps, and to connect with each other. And so when you talk about psycho-ecology, it takes me to ecopsychology.
Right.
And of course, ecopsychology is, it has different definitions, but for me, it's really about how we are connected to nature and how that outer world also impacts our inner world and how our inner world is reflected in the outer world.
Okay. Okay. I guess I long for the day when we can pick up the phone and talk to people directly. I don't have the same experience of being on Twitter as you have to this point. I see most of it being self-promotional jargon. Some of it's been really blessed. Really connected with a few folks there. But yeah, overall, it's been sort of a quagmire for me.
Well, and I think that is a pretty common feeling. And so, again, that is sort of the gap that as a culture, it's something that we are going to have to face because, as you know, anything that is not looked at and addressed is still residing somewhere in the unconscious, as Jung would say. And it's going to manifest somewhere if it's not looked at and addressed. So if indeed this is a shallow stream of self-promotional, egotistical posts that are really not going anywhere, then how is that manifesting in our culture? How is that going to show up elsewhere unless we approach it with a different kind of consciousness? And so, see, for me, Twitter and social media in general is about education. It's about consciousness. It's a tool that can actually be used to increase consciousness. But most people either don't know that or don't care to address it or use it in that way. Why should they? I mean, we have substituted so much of our relationship. In the early days of humanity, again, we used to live in tribes, and we would get up in the morning and we'd gather around the fire and we'd talk about dreams, and there was a context for things. There was this sort of ritual that had significance and meaning to it. Now we get up in the morning and, I just read a statistic yesterday that a third of people check their Facebook on smartphones in bed before they ever get up in the morning. And I have to admit, I've been guilty of doing something like that. And so I know that statistic is probably pretty realistic. But where's the context? Where's the meaning of that?
Exactly. Yeah, I would like to propose that we all join up at the community garden and talk to people face to face
Yeah.
and plant the seeds and do the harvest. Because I don't see salvation in Twitter consciousness.
I agree, and I think in the end it probably is about balance, because one cannot replace the thing that you just talked about. There's no
Right.
way that it can be a substitute or a surrogate for that. It's going to have to be both and.
Right. Right. Let's talk about mythology. I would pose that most of the ancient Greek and other myths are burnt out, have no resonance to speak of. That's the first thing. The second thing might be that we need to create our own mythology now, based on some principle or spiritual path, so we all know how to use it, what it is, what it says. We need to empower ourselves through a new mythology, and that's part of what I'm up to. I've written 6 myths. They're on Plant Shifter, and they all sort of stem from nature, nature story, permaculture. I guess I'm kind of a broken record, but that's where the source of spirit and alchemy and new mythology might be coming from. Is return to the land, and a localization process. I'm curious, Bonnie, what goes off in your head when you hear the phrase new mythology?
That's a good question. I think it's an important one. Um, I don't hear that term much, actually, and it could be that it is because I feel when you say the words to me that I'm a little bit resistant to it. Now that's something to explore in and of myself, because it seems like the reason that I'm resistant to it is because I don't know if we need new mythology. There has been a lot of discussion that I've been exposed to about whether or not the myth, and I think I asked you that just a few minutes ago, whether or not the mythology that we have is working for us. Um, for me, mythology is once again a container. It's a pattern into which we can locate ourselves so that we understand what our role is in relationship to everything else on this planet, everything else in history, all of the archetypes and the patterns that exist. And what I think is those myths have served us for a long, long time as a humanity. But the problem is that for many reasons, we have separated ourselves out of those myths. It's partly because that we've developed this powerful capacity to reason, and that we have shifted toward a more scientific, logical, rational way of thinking. That we have separated, we've pulled ourselves literally out of the fabric, and therefore we have really lost a feel for where we are. We're kind of turned upside down. And Jung said, he said modern man has suffered an almost fatal shock, psychologically speaking. And as a result, he's fallen into profound uncertainty. And this is where I look at this. We've substituted what we understood as a indigenous people that were connected to the earth and to the ancient gods. We at that time we knew what our relationship was to the gods, and now we've shifted the gods completely. Now we worship the goddess reason, as Jung said. We worship the goddess technology. We worship the god Facebook, or Twitter even, and because we have shifted our own position outside of that fabric of being, that mythology that held us and contained us and showed us a map almost of where we need to exist, and what our relationship is in conjunction with everything else, we're lost. And so I think it's more about replacing ourselves into that myth, into the myths that exist, rather than coming up with new mythologies. Now that's only my opinion, and I'm curious to know what you feel and think about that as well.
Well, you're hitting a bunch of hot buttons here, so that's excellent.
Good.
Thank you. First of all, I would softly push back on you because I don't think mythology is a container at all. I think mythology is an active process when it's working. So the metaphor here is important to me. I would tell you that Joseph Campbell's work is still as important today as it ever was. I write for the Joseph Campbell Foundation, and I'm interviewing Bob Walter now, who's the head of that organization. But Campbell's work needs to be recatalyzed, in my opinion. And so much of mythology is viewed as a past phenomenon or as a set of something. I view it as a future context. When I say I'm writing new mythology, I'm writing for the future, not for the present or the past. I'm preparing us for a time when we'll need stories to help us through this hugely transitional problem that's almost upon us. So one of the things that I find solace is recapturing some of the Campbellian principles in a future context. And so that's what I mean by new mythologies. It's to me, a founding set of principles for my work, for sure.
So would you say that you see myth as more of a vehicle that can carry us to a new place?
Yeah, myth here is an educational process, an active educational lead or guide, a light. And what we have now is a bunch of burned out stories.
What's occurring to me, however, is that myths are often focused on archetypes. And I don't know if you agree with that, but
I do.
Archetypes, there's a lot of discussion about whether or not there can be new archetypes, or if it's always just archetypes appearing in a new form. So archetypes are, ancient and also infinite. And so we see new things coming up, new cycles and new things coming up, but perhaps the new mythology is just restating the same thing in a new way.
Well, I'm not going to sit here on video and tell you that I'm a Jungian psychologist. My background is in urban planning, amongst other things. But I'm not going to wait around for the day when people say I can't invent new archetypes, or I'm not going to wait around for folks to challenge my claim that I can produce new alchemy. What I'm saying, Bonnie, is I'm on this journey. I'm reporting in today. I'll be on the journey tonight and tomorrow. And part of my journey is to grab all the stuff I can find and make what sense I can make of it, because I know that no matter how you slice it, human beings are in danger of becoming extinct on this planet. That much is clear to me. And secondly, the tools that we have gotten us to this point. So why cling to them? Why not go off on a journey and find some potentially other promising ideas, including archetypes and alchemies and mythologies. Um, we need to take the gamble because we're going nowhere now.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's what I really appreciate about your work is how you are bringing imagination to it, because I believe also that is something that we have lost connection with as a humanity. Is we have lost our capacity to imagine possibilities and how the world could be different. And that's also part of the challenge with technology, is that when you approach technology without imagination, suddenly it becomes something that's very different, very mechanical, and very deadening. Uh, I also agree with you about, I loved what you said about how we're going to need stories for the upcoming, how do we call it, an era, a transition.
Right.
I'm wondering actually, just to take a turn in a bit of a different direction, or maybe it's the direction that we've ultimately always been going. There's a lot of talk about 2012. And in some ways, I look at 2012 as an archetype. Once again, it's an end time. It's a cataclysmic turning point, or potentially cataclysmic turning point as an archetype. Whether or not 2012 will actually be that for our Earth and our humanity remains to be seen. But I'm curious about your thoughts about 2012. What's your take on it? Are we headed to a crisis? Is it a transition? Business as usual? Pull out your crystal ball here, Willi.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's 2012 now, which is a little facetious, but the dangers that are coming are very much known now, and so it doesn't take another year to encounter those and to start counteracting them. But I think it's become basically a marketing cliche, and not something I'm really worried about too much because I'm already worried.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I agree with that as well. I personally felt a real sense of calling several years ago. There was a moment of calling for me that was based on this idea that we were moving into a pretty big transition, and that there needed to be some people who could negotiate that and help others to negotiate that and deal with that. And so that's a very personal topic for me as well. What if you had three words that would really best describe your hope for the future, for the world to come? What would those three words be?
Sacred in permaculture.
Sacred and
In
permaculture.
permaculture. Right. Permaculture to me is going to be a system of real positive change and a way to the sacred. There's a model which I developed with a triangle with new mythology, new alchemy, permaculture at the corners of the triangle, and then sacred would be in the middle. I've tried to figure out how we can get past the choke point of old religions, of Catholicism and Buddhism and all the rest. One of my charges is to help us figure out what is more or less pure sacred without all the dogma and politics. So I'm feeling pretty good about this model. I'm asking a lot of people about what is sacred to them. In fact, what is sacred to them right now as a spark. And so, Bonnie, right, what is sacred to you today, right now? What do you say?
That's a great question. Yeah, and I wish, actually, even as you say that, and I'm feeling into myself to feel what that would be. It's revealing all kinds of things. This that just want to come streaming out of me. First of all, the fact that it's causing me to feel. That's a big one. I think that we don't take the time as a society very much to actually feel our feelings. We tend to be somewhat reactive as a general rule, and so sometimes emotions come streaming out, but they're reactive rather than proactive, in the sense that we take a pause and we allow ourselves to just be. And I also believe the other part of that, what's sacred to me, is feeling a connection to something that is more than just me, whatever that is, whether it's nature or, something that's divine, something that's numinous, as Jung would call it. Um, that's what's sacred to me, is that feeling of connection to something. But I'll tell you, if we don't slow down and create the space for that to enter in, to pour into our lives, then it can't happen. And so it's really, so what's sacred also is having a ritual or a system that allows that to happen.
Yeah, man, I'm so happy to hear that the question caused you to feel. That was incredible because it tied right back to the lack of feeling I get from Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Point blank, yeah.
Yeah, I have felt that lack of feeling as well, and I suspect most people do. However, I have also had a feeling and noticed it when I was on Twitter, perhaps because, as a general rule, it kind of becomes an expectation that there's not going to be, that there's that shallowness there again, that when the depth occurs, it actually is kind of surprising.
Right.
But I believe that it can happen. I have felt deeply connected to certain people that just make the time to make a comment or post something that is meaningful to me.
Good. That is the kernel that we need to look for and develop, perhaps in your dissertation. When is it sacred? When do you feel something? When is it holistic? And when is it just processing?
Right. And I'll tell you something else. As you know, I have founded this online community for depth psychology called Depth Psychology Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that has been on my mind from the beginning and that I continue to wrestle with almost on a daily basis, and that is how to create a sacred space online. Because we all know that it can happen in groups. We've all been in groups, whether they were based on psychology, self-help, personal growth, transformation, or something else. I recently went to a memorial service for a friend, and it was one of the most amazing and connecting events that I've ever been to. It was very sacred. But how can you create an online community using technology in a space that is essentially devoid of emotion as a general rule? So this is something that I struggle with on a daily basis, but I honestly believe that it can happen. And again, if we can, circle ourselves around a fire, around a central point, and create a container in some place that's safe, then I believe people can honestly begin to communicate with each other.
Yeah, I would hope that we could come together in a face-to-face ceremony and then offer other types of discussion in the online world. I guess I would say that you need to have both online and face-to-face to foster the sacred.
I think that would be ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well,
Logistically, I mean, one of the beautiful things about the Alliance and about other online communities, I'm sure, is that it allows people in vastly scattered geographical spaces to come together into one unifying space. And, it's very difficult to actually make that happen in the physical world.
don't you think that there's an aspect of sacredness, of purpose? I was curious to know what your purpose is on the planet, you know?
To be in a space where I am grounded and centered, and therefore that would make me available to be helpful to other people as things kind of get crazy, as things become chaotic, as we enter chaotic space on the planet, as people's lives sort of fall apart around them. I've never been actually drawn necessarily to the therapeutic route, the clinical route, where I would be a therapist, but I believe that I can be a source for raising consciousness so that people can do their own work and can in turn become grounded and centered and be able to manage whatever it is that life throws at them. So that's where my sense of calling comes. It's really to help people in that space.
What what would depth psychology bring to a discussion of the future? Say we got people together and you moderated a discussion about 2025. What tools would you bring to that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I love depth psychology with a passion. So, if you ask me, it's the answer to everything. But that's because it is everything. In Jung, and of course, I talk a lot about Jung because depth psychology is focused quite heavily on his contributions. It began, of course, with Freud and even with Freud's mentor, Breuer, and they were looking at what was unspoken, what was unsaid, what was, in Freud's case, repressed that he believed could be brought to conscious knowledge and then therefore dealt with and treated. What Jung brought to that actually was the idea of the collective unconscious. And that is that there is a vast amount of information, existence, being. Everything is included in the collective unconscious. Everything. It's wholeness. It is actually wholeness. And that means the answers, if indeed there are answers and if we need answers, because some people would say that everything is exactly right the way it is, and if we are collapsing as a species and a culture, that's part of what it is, because it's what we need to go through in order to learn to grow and to individuate. But I believe the beauty and the power of depth psychology is through symbolism, and that is to be able to discover what actually exists in the collective unconscious that can be of help to us in both our daily lives, our personal lives, as well as the collective and in our culture. And so several Jungians have said that for everything that exists on the inside of your psyche, every idea, every problem, every challenge, everything, there is something that exists on the outside in the form of a symbol. So if I look out my window and I see a bird fly by, that bird is representing something that's going on in the collective unconscious, in my own psyche. And so if it's almost like that's the language that the unconscious speaks, and there are answers and there are treasures and there's richness within that that can help us. But we need to be paying attention and on some level in not just interpreting and analyzing, but engaging with those symbols that are shown to us. So by engaging, what I mean is actually conducting a conversation with those. Jung called that active imagination. There are a lot of technologies of the sacred that engage on a similar level. Dream work can be one of those. But it's actually to find out from that symbol what it is that it has to tell us. And so we can do that by studying myths. We can do that by watching our dreams. We can do that by just paying attention to the world around us. We can do that by going for a walk in nature and seeing what arises. And again, you pointed to this earlier, but it's so much about our intentions. It's about consciousness. It's about being aware that there is something that's trying to come through, that there is something that wants to make itself known to us. If we're on Twitter too busy self-promoting ourselves and getting into that aspect of it, we're not going to pay attention and notice the things that are really important that are trying to come through. So this maybe ties back to your initial question to me, and that was, what tools would you bring to a group of people perhaps that were engaged in active imagining of what we can do for our planet, of how we can increase permaculture and contribute to that. And so in a group like that, actually as a moderator or a facilitator, what I would encourage people to do is to find symbols that we could then bring together and sort of put on the table in the center of our circle and say, what do these symbols have in common, and what are they telling us? Because it can be at the moment, it can be for a specific situation, and it can be very powerful if you treat those symbols as something that have their own, that are autonomous, that have their own energy and intelligence, that are showing up at that time and place for a specific reason in order to communicate something to us.
So you've identified personal symbols and collective symbols, correct?
Correct.
So how do you find a balance in working with those things?
How I would describe symbols and my understanding of them from a personal standpoint, and I think from a depth psychological standpoint, is that symbols are specific to the situation and the context. So,
Okay.
for example, if you have a dream and a symbol appears in your dream, like let's say it's a black dog, well, I can go get a dream dictionary off of my bookshelf and open it up and see what a dog means in a dream and see what black means as a color in a dream. But that may not actually be specific to my personal situation. It may have something entirely different to tell me. And so I would just say, again, it's based on the context. So, for example, the other day I was challenged by something and I just kind of said to psyche or to the collective unconscious, show me a symbol that will give me some information for what's going on here. And I immediately saw an image of a tomato. And I thought, a tomato? What the heck does that have to do with anything? I couldn't place it. And then actually it only took me a few seconds, and what I realized was that I had grown tomatoes in my garden 2 years ago, and last year I never planted tomatoes, and all of those tomatoes came back without me planting them. And that's because the tomatoes that had fallen off the vine that I didn't end up picking had replanted themselves in some way and were actually growing back up without me having to go there and cultivate and tend them and plant them. And what I realized was, and I believe this was my challenge was around just having the time to focus on certain things and grow things and not taking the time to go and do the things that I felt like I needed to do. And that tomato was a symbol of, for me, in the end, it was a symbol of trusting that I have planted the seeds, that the seeds are there, they're going to grow regardless of whether or not I can take the time right now to go focus on that particular aspect of my life or my business, whatever it is that I was doing. So that's just an example.
Cool.
In a group, if we're talking about the state of the planet and humanity and what we're doing, other symbols may arise. Maybe my tomatoes would be appropriate for that group. Maybe we're planting seeds, even you and I, Willi, by collaborating on this interview, by doing what we're each individually doing with our respective organizations and our respective work. Maybe maybe we are doing enough that the seeds have been planted and it's going to grow up on its own. And so I find so much value in the individual symbol and what it wants from us, what it wants to communicate to us at any given moment.
Interesting. Um, you're definitely following an interesting course of discussion here. I'm trying to figure out the new symbols of permaculture, for instance, and how those will affect a global sacredness, or simply get people out in the backyard and turn over some sod. You have to start somewhere.
Right.
But it's interesting that there might already be symbols to use, or conversely, we may have to make up new ones. Is it possible to invent new alchemy? And I'm not waiting around. I'm just going to invent them and see if they work. Apply them. So it's a really fertile area. I'm really interested in that.
It's very powerful, and I'm very grateful for the work that you're doing. I think that, again, it comes back to that imagination. It's the power of imagination and being able to imagine symbols in a new way, imagine myth in a new way, imagine alchemy in a new way. Actually, what's happening is we are imagining our relationship to all of those things in a new way. And I think that's what's going to have to change is our relationship to it. As long as we continue to treat the earth as dead, to treat nature as an object that we can manipulate and take advantage of. Even the word resources is pretty controversial in my book because, we're used to availing ourselves of resources. And in fact, as long as we continue to treat the earth in that way, we're not going to be able to move forward. So we need to reimagine our relationship to the symbols that exist, to the, to nature itself. And so I really am grateful and appreciative of the work that you're doing because that's what I see that you're doing.
Cool.
Cool.
We're doing the same work.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, Willi, I really appreciate your time today. I think it's been a very rich and fertile discussion, and I look forward to following up on this at some point in the near future.
Thank you so much.